So now to follow a little bit more about Inchstones. I'm really very devoted to the idea of being able to measure children with very severe functional impairments, and that's brought me in contact with the CDD community, as I previously described, but it's also brought me in contact with the Inchstone group, and lots of those people are here today. So that's a very nice opportunity for all of us and to share with you. And we're particularly interested in what's called a floor effect, where scale scores are particularly low for children who have limited range of skills, and that would be expected, but we really cannot map and articulate the small steps that child might be able to take at that low end of range. So when using a scale that's not scaled for the child, then we will miss meaningful small steps, and also we will miss steps that might represent harm or decline in functions. And so measures really need to be granular across all abilities. And this is the way the comms department at my institution has redrawn an image that you can find very readily on the internet to show the importance of small steps to show your steps, rather than not being able to make it to that first step in the ladder when they're more widely spaced apart. So the vision of the Inchstone group is that every person, regardless of their clinical severity, can have even their smallest achievements counted. And so this is our mission, documented there, that we will, over the next few years, develop a set of reliable measures that are psychometrically sound, like that pipeline I showed earlier, sensitive to meaningful change, and fit for purpose in children with a severe DEE. And this is the group. Some are here, so you'll recognise them, but you can see that we're a slightly wider group, and we seem to be expanding also. So that is great news for the capacity to tackle more issues and problems. So also going back to our CDKL5 work, this is the pipeline of validation and work that we are doing aiming to have fit-for-purpose outcome measures, but in that set you can see there is a measure for gross motor function and hand function. So our answer is, our question now is to look at the sets of gross motor and hand function measurements that we do have available. In fact, there is an abundance of measures for these particular domains. They've been assessed in detail, particularly by physical therapists and occupational therapists over many, many years. We have the child development literature, which has given us tests like the Bailey, the Peabody, and also the developmental profile, which is a parent-reported measure of general functional domains, including gross motor and hand function. These are developed for particular age ranges, and those are measures that we should look at and take great interest in and make sure that they can be applied to children outside that age range. And there's also a wide range of measures available for more advanced motor skills, and I've just put a couple of those up because we all have experience with very wide ranges of phenotype, and it is important that we have in mind what might be possible to assess a domain effectively for a wide phenotype with focus on Inchstones. So there's also measures from specific fields, and the cerebral palsy literature is particularly relevant in that regard. It was really interesting to see some GMFM data, the gross motor function scale. This is 88 in the old days, now 66 item scale, and it measures skills from rolling right up to running. So it's a really wide-ranging measure. It doesn't do head control as well as what it does all those other skills, but it is still a very important measure for the literature. The gross motor performance measure is about the quality of movement, and so that may be of relevance in looking at the wider range of phenotype. And there's also the functional mobility scale, which relates just to walking, but in relation to how much assistance in different settings, i.e. different distances that would map to different settings. There are a range of hand function measures, the Able Hand Kids, the Earhart Developmental Prehension Assessment, assessment and the quality of upper extremity skills test. And these are all probably not so relevant to severe DEEs, partly because, one, the able hand kids test is very, very complex. You have to be able to unscrew a jar, for example. And the other assessments are very targeted towards the cerebral palsy phenotype, where there's a lot of items that relate to posture and reflexes that you may observe. There's also the physical abilities and mobility scale, which was developed for children recovering from head injury. And this is a really interesting scale to take note of, partly because it includes an item for head control, items for transition, and items for tolerance. So that also has relevance to children with very severe impairments. There are the adaptive functioning scales. They're not measuring skills directly, but how those skills are used in daily life. And we've seen from the presentations this morning and earlier from Anne that there's really is a floor effect for children with severe DEEs. And you can mitigate that problem somewhat by using raw scores, or with the Vinelands more recently, there are the growth value scores, which Audrey Thurm from NIH has led work in transforming the raw scores into a different metric. And those we need data on to see how they perform longitudinally over time. But the problem for gross motor skills is that it starts at sitting. And there's that's way too late in the piece for the early skills that you're wanting children with a severe developmental impairment to be working on. That cannot count improvement very effectively. It certainly cannot count decline. With the fine motor scale, 4 of the items actually do comment on basic grasping, and that's a little bit more appropriate to the very severe impairments that you may see. So the ABAS is similar in that it starts with sitting, and again we have seen some evidence that using the raw scores is superior to using the standard scores, but that's not getting at the Inchstones that we need to get at for many of the children. So we have a really rich landscape, and we want to understand, are the measurements feasible and acceptable? Do they have the right content validity? And looking at some of those earlier examples, they're starting too high, or they're not particularly addressing head control very well. Do they need cognitive capacity to actually perform some of the items, so that some of those items may not simply be representing the gross motor skills? And also, is there evidence for their validity and their reliability and responsiveness in the groups that we're interested in? And do we have manuals as to how they can be implemented systematically in clinical trials? And the answer to that is probably not for many of those items, and that's a good part of the work now. We heard the work on STX BP1, where there was a set of data for the GMFM. That's exciting to see data being accumulated and observed, the work of our CDD group, the work of the Inchstone group, and undoubtedly the work of others. And so in Inchstone, we are looking at the Baileys with children with severe impairments, and also the DP4, the parent report general development measure. And we will be looking at those for acceptability, their content validity, and those results, we don't have them yet, but they will be forthcoming. For the CDD program, we have 2 of those measures in our suite of measures that are specifically about gross motor and hand function. And so I'd like to show you a little bit about those now. They are developed, they're short, they're modified. Sorry, we didn't develop them from scratch. We modified them from previously available measures for Rett syndrome. They are informed by the GMFM and made and modified according to the more severe phenotype of CDKL5. They are video measures, so we can collect them remotely from the children's homes, and this means, and they also are asking about feasible tasks in the everyday. So there's something practical about every single item, and we and also it ensures that we do not need to be cognitively less. The cognition is less a part of the actual task. So the gross motor assessment has been submitted for publication. It is modified from the GMFM and also the Rett syndrome gross motor scale, and we administer it for children who are older than 18 months. They've had the time when a child would ordinarily have developed walking, because some of those items include walking. There are 17 gross motor tasks, and they start with lying, sitting, standing, walking, and changing positions, and include an item, 2 items for head control. And each item is rated on a 4-point scale, with 3 indicating greater skill, and the total possible score is 51. And here you can see 2 of the items, somebody at a score of 0, 1, 2 and 3 for the item sitting on the floor and standing, and you can see different levels of assistance. We're rating with the level of assistance required because that is definable and observable, whereas many scales will rate whether the child does this or sometimes does this or usually does this, and we really wanted to make it observable and replicable, and that's why we have agreed or sort of decided on the level of assistance as being our guide for response categories. So these are the distribution of scores in 109 children with complete video sets. We have 2 children who have scored 0. Those are wide bars on that histogram. So 2 children have scored 0, and one child actually has scored in the high 40s. So the mean score was 28, and we've had reliability testing for coding the videos, and we have good to substantial kappa values for all items. Scores are different by different groups. Boys have lower scores than girls, and children are different according to other functional abilities, such as their hand use or their communication abilities. And also children older than 5 had higher scores than children who were younger than 5. And we do see that it takes longer for the children to achieve skills. And so we would find that to be an expected change. And this is the person item map from the RASH model for 137 data sets this time. And we had item redundancy, so we were able to drop measures to make the measure more streamlined. And you can see that the measures range from lower in difficulty up to much harder in difficulty. The most problematic item, and we have dropped this item, is the child lying on their tummy prone and lifting their head. And that's a fundamental skill. I would expect that would have been a great item to include, but in actual fact it was limited even for children who had very high scores for all of the other measures, often because they didn't extend their head higher than, in line with their trunk. They didn't show a nice extension of their necks when on their tummies and would not tolerate that prone position. So it was a really difficult item to evaluate systematically. We had some items with what's called disordered category thresholds, and this is where the proportions of items that were scored for 0, 1, 2 or 3, it might have been very low for the 2s and 3s where there was some or moderate assistance to complete the task, and we elected not to combine items to get a better RASH model, because then we would lose some of the granularity and the ability to measure progress or decline using smaller steps or Inchstones. So with the hand function scale, this was modified originally from the hand apraxia scale and then modified and then into the Rett syndrome hand function scale. And we've essentially administered it as is with additional instructions for parents if their child has cortical visual impairment. It's an 8-point scale, and it observes grasping of household objects, and it ranges from no grasping to a child who can grasp an object, transfer the object from hand to hand, large and small objects, and does that with skill, accurately positioning their hand in orientation and to the size of the object. And this picture shows you, the bottom line shows a child who's unable to grasp an object even with help, a child who can grasp a small toy and hold that herself, pick it up. The next level is showing a child with a raking grasp for a small piece of food. The next level from that would be using the thumb for the grasp. But then the upper line is showing that nice pincer grip, but also that child transferring something from hand to hand. And her hand just zones in on that scone with great precision, and she's oriented her hand, and it's the precise right size for the object. So she's scoring an 8. So this is a really simple hand function assessment. We looked at all of the other child development assessments, and both the motor and the hand assessments, that we can collect them remotely. They're small, they're simple, they're everyday, and so we're finding that they're telling us information about the child that is appropriate to the range of skills. This is the distribution for the hand function scores across 86 video sets. Again, reliability for coding the videos with our manual, with our training is high, and the known groups validation. Comparing different groups, we see expected differences in the level of hand function. So my final thoughts are that we have a massive number of scales in the gross motor and the fine motor function arena. Many of the scales will have flaw effects, and we need more data to be able to understand that to be the case. But since many of them do not cater well for head control, for example, with hand function, then they're likely to be difficult scales to show a difference in children with DEEs. The alternative scoring for the adaptive behaviour scales, the VABS and the ABAS, could provide some assistance in this regard, but still for gross motor, if we start at sitting, we're missing important skills for that child. We need validation data, and the Inchstone group over the next year will be able to report to you on how the DP4 is performing, and also the Bailey in this very severely impacted group. Our video measures are promising for our particular group. We're particularly interested in being able to support trials where they may come into clinic for particular assessments, but there can also be ongoing evaluation at home with this very specifically designed protocol. And I think that's all. Thank you. I've got my slide with the link to our survey, but you can use Anne's, or you could be an honorary Australian and use this link and the code of TAME, your choice. And we hope that anyone who will join our survey to understand priorities, what makes a difference, and start with our validation of some of these measures even more. We have the DP4 in it, so it's critical to be involved and help in this effort. Thank you to all the families, our teams, and for our support. Thank you very much.